All right. Good evening and welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I'm your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. Tuning in live. Thank you so much for giving me your time this evening. Taking a little bit of break, actually, from doing the morning show. We're going to do something in the evening here. Hopefully, this old man makes it tonight. We will see. What are we doing tonight? Well, I have Jeremiah Harding on. We are going to debate the proposition of bigotry is permissible within libertarianism. I am taking the affirmative and he is taking the negative. To balance things out and to ensure a fair debate, Jake Porter has volunteered to be the moderator. So I will bring both of those in here in just a moment. And I will basically hand over the keys to Jake and he will be running the show and we will see what we get out of tonight. Now, I want to let you guys know, as a rule of thumb, I really try, don't always do it, but I really try to keep a family-friendly show. However, in a debate, maybe people get a little bit animated or there's a loose profanity, which also happens sometimes on my own show. So I just want to let you guys know that if you have your children present, perhaps you just kind of keep in mind, I don't think it's going to get out of control. I don't think we're going to be dropping F-bombs left and right. But if you hear something, we're doing a special event tonight. So that's where we are. With all of that being said, let's get these guys in here tonight. So let's bring in Jeremiah first. Jeremiah, good evening. How are you?
I'm reasonable. You?
Right.
I think it's a pretty good time to get this sort of thing going with the Libertarian Convention coming up.
Right.
Like, I, for some time, have been monitoring bigotry in a variety of spaces and watching its negative effects. So I know exactly how damaging it is, and I hope to make the case as concisely and well as I can tonight.
All right, awesome. And let's bring in our moderator tonight, Jake Porter. So, Jake, there we go. How we are. Let's put him in the middle here so he can, moderate in between us. So, Jake, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. I'm here,
Awesome.
and we'll see who can outlast the moderator. I also go to bed very early and wake up really early, so
Right.
you guys may still be debating after I'm gone to bed.
Well, let's hope not, because I don't know how long I'll last. Right, I might get like 12 o'clock and pass out. I don't know. So anyway, Jake, the controls are yours. You can introduce the format or take it away.
Well, I think we'll start out that the resolve that bigotry is permissible in libertarianism. What say you, DL?
Are you asking me to jump into the
the opening statement?
Okay. Yeah. Got it. Let's dive right in. All right. So, folks, good evening. Tonight's resolution is bigotry is permissible in libertarianism. By permissible, I mean a person can hold ugly, stubborn, or prejudiced beliefs and still fully participate in a free society and in our political movement without violating anyone's fundamental rights. My position rests on three simple ideas that I believe can address most any problem society faces. Number one, self-ownership. You own your life, your body, your mind, and the results of your effort. No one else controls what you think or believe. Number two, non-aggression. You may not initiate force, the threat of force, or fraud against others. You can persuade, argue, boycott, or walk away, but you cannot use violence or threats to control someone else's mind or choice. Number three, freedom of association. You have the right to choose who you spend time with, who you do business with, or even call a friend. The right includes the freedom to say no or disassociate from people whose views you reject. These three principles, self-ownership, non-aggression, and freedom of association, are the complete foundation that we need. If we remain grounded in them, we do not need to focus on excising bigotry from the movement. When someone says bigotry must be made impermissible, the real question is, at what cost? Turning libertarianism into a gatekeeping operation that screens hearts and minds, distracts from reducing government power, and sends a troubling message about the free society we claim to want. Because here's the deeper problem, folks. Our movement should be a living example of what a freer society could look like. If we cannot peacefully coexist with imperfect, even unsavory people inside a voluntary movement or political organization, then how exactly are we going to build a whole society on those same ideas? Furthermore, where shall such people live? Where will they work? What happens when we must share spaces in the halls of Congress or city council on our way to that freer world? Exclusion from an organization like a political party is one thing, but to fundamentally require exclusion from a movement that we wish to become the foundation for a free society quickly creates more problems than it resolves. History and experience shows that these three principles are sufficient. When people are left free, voluntary cooperation and contact often reduce prejudice more effectively than exclusion ever has. For example, Jackie Robinson didn't wait for racism to disappear before playing baseball. Branch Rickey exercised freedom of association and gave him a chance. Bessie Coleman, she barnstormed across the country after being rejected by American schools. Booker T. Washington, well, his students made the best bricks in the area, and white farmers bought them in spite of their bigoted views. Economic cooperation and demonstrated excellence did not solve bigotry, but it did change the attitudes in ways that exclusion never could. Modern examples like Daryl Davis and Dia Khan, well, they show the same pattern. Voluntary, repeated contact helped to convince self-avowed white supremacists to walk away from their hate. Science also backs this up. Gordon Allport's contact hypothesis and hundreds of studies that followed, they confirm what we already see under freedom, that when people interact voluntarily, warts and all, prejudice tends to decrease. But that is not our goal. Our goal is liberty. It is how, it is, however, a welcome side effect of sticking to the three pillars instead of adding more requirements. Bigotry is often irrational and repugnant, But the idea that we must first purify every heart before we can reduce the size and scope of government is far more dangerous to a free society. Our job is not to ensure a perfect movement. Our job is to defend the conditions under which imperfect people can peacefully live together and work out their differences through self-ownership, non-aggression, and genuine freedom of association. That is why I support or affirm the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremiah. Why is he wrong?
All right, so I'd like to start by playing something from somebody's accurate thoughts in this regard that I think will be salient in this conversation. So I'm just going to hit play here. Hope that my setup works.
That's like 687 episodes ago. I can't hear it.
Oh, you can't hear it?
Barely, very barely.
Okay, then I'm guessing that that I need to handle something. So I'm gonna put my headphones on my mic then. That'll be the jank ass setup that we're working with tonight, because this is important.
An honest adversary. So in his book On Liberty, John Stuart Mill says this: he who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that. His reasons may be good, and no one may have been able to refute them. But if he is equally unable to refute the reasons on the opposite side, if he does not so much as know what they are, he has no ground for preferring either opinion. The rational position for him would be suspension of judgment, and unless he contends himself with that, he is either led by authority or adopts, like the generality of the world, the side to which he feels most inclination.
So I believe that fairly succinctly states a truth, that if one is a bigot, that being one has an inherently irrational, not just imperfect, position about somebody else, that they themselves are ceding the ground for their position to anybody with an actual argument against anything. Ultimately, they are a dishonest adversary by default, and I would argue very led by authority, because the general result of bigotry is authoritarianism. There are some people who choose to, go form their little race communes for their white nationalism or whatever. And those people, are certainly a preferable alternative to people like the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire, who's trying to control the reins of government to form a white ethno-state. But there are fundamentally the same mentalities at play here. What we're dealing with is not just something that is irrational or repugnant, while it is both of those things at all times inherently. What we are dealing with here is something that is instrumentally and elementally anti-liberty. Libertarianism has always been rooted in free will. A bigot, a prejudiced person, somebody who is racist, as confirmed by people like Ayn Rand, Rose Wilder Lane, and a bunch of other noted thinkers, very, very fundamentally rooted in the idea that one is default negative. One is default and by no choice of their own negative. And in doing so, you can justify any number of authoritarian policies. Now, of course, Ayn Rand would later go on to be just as bigoted toward Arabs in justification of Zionism. I'm no fan of her. And she was no fan of libertarians. But I include her because even the most staunch right libertarian usually at least has some veneration for her ideals. And when it comes down to it, the right libertarian mentality of assisting bigotry overall has led to a drawdown in freedoms overall. They accept an AI surveillance state, a war machine, a variety of machinations of martial law, and a variety of other things just to deal with the immigration problem. The bigotry threat is that every single bigot by default believes that their opposition is worse by default and therefore must be dealt with in a way that is commensurate with that belief. This leads to those policies. This leads to most wars, most genocides, slavery, a variety of other things like It leads to the idea that women are inferior and should not be given the same abilities as men. It leads to the ideas that root every single authoritarian modus that has ever existed. Without bigotry, authoritarianism has nary a leg to stand on. Authoritarianism relies on bigotry. And I would ask, is the opposite true? Can libertarianism rely on bigotry? Can a philosophy that is fundamentally rooted in the concept of free will allow for the mentality that somebody is worse by default because they're black, because they're a woman, because they're gay or trans or Muslim or anything like that? Is it acceptable, for instance, in a libertarian framework, to have a society that fully excludes straight white Christian men who don't have trans children? I don't think any right libertarian would say that this is an acceptable society. In fact, some of the most exclusionary and bigoted people in libertarianism, including Hans Hermann Hoppe, would say that you have to remove those people by physical force, physically remove them, so to speak, in order to maintain a libertarian social order. This is because he is a prime example of this bigotry in action and how it is only exclusionary. To say that these people are simply imperfect is to ignore the reason that imperfection exists. And to say that allowing them to practice their form of imperfection is acceptable in libertarianism is to say that they are allowed to exclude by default anybody they believe to be imperfect, but we can't say anything in return. That strikes me as hypocrisy. I'll look forward to seeing whether or not my opponent can justify an opposite mentality.
And I would like to remind the audience that they are more than welcome to ask questions as well, and we may get a chance to go to some of those questions as we enjoy this debate tonight. The question that I'm going to start off with is I'm going to use a kind of a personal example or something that happened before. So, should libertarians try to dig into this a little bit deeper? Should libertarians defend the right of bigots? And I'll give you an example. Back in Iowa several years ago, there was a group of high school students. There's actually a couple different instances. One where kids flew the Confederate flag on their truck. They drove them into the school property. And another was where kids burned on their parents' property a cross. Now, we can say these things are offensive, but should libertarians defend their rights, or is that something that we should not do? Let's go with Jeremiah first on this.
So here's the question I would ask. In terms of libertarian priorities, why would a libertarian, in any sense, prioritize the defense of these people's speech when these people do not prioritize the defense of other people's speech? The Confederate platform, in and of itself, defends slavery. It defends the mentalities that are associated with the worst anti-libertarian functions of government. And so does the Klan, so do Nazis, so do a variety of other bigots. I would ask whether or not this is a priority we should have to begin with, because there are plenty of people who don't advocate such onerous claims against liberty who need our defense. But, you know, just to play devil's advocate, people should be able to say what they want, even if that is to say that they are not a libertarian because they are a bigot. If these people practice these sorts of things, I would ask what sort of liberty can be attained by the Confederacy? What sort of liberty has been fought for by the Klan? What sort of liberty can be attained through a white ethno-state? If the answer is none, then I would argue fundamentally those people are not libertarian. And the question is whether or not the people in question can be defended by libertarians while not being libertarians themselves, which is a separate issue. Because if these people are by default not libertarian because of what they support, you know, if we're going to say taxation is slavery and therefore wrong, we have to also say that slavery is slavery and therefore wrong. If one is impermissible in libertarianism, then so is a group of people who venerate those who practice slavery. Otherwise, they are not libertarian. They are fundamentally anathema to it in practice and in philosophy. So The question is whether or not, as a libertarian, I can say that these people should be able to say what they want to say while not being a libertarian, while not being permissible in a libertarian framework. And I would say absolutely they should be able to say that they're not libertarians. And I will agree with them and say that I hope that they say that as much as possible so that we can practice our freedom of association to tell them to get bent.
Am I up?
Yeah, same question to
Okay.
you.
All right. So if I understand the question, that was a lot, and I'm not really sure if the question was fully answered exactly, but the question was, or in Iowa, there were some students that drove a Confederate flag onto the school, and the question is, should libertarians defend their
Defend their
right?
rights. So, yeah, so they were, kicked out of extracurricular activities, things that didn't, nothing, no activity that happened at the school itself, caused them to do that. But the school did punish them by kicking
So
them
this
out of
was off
extracurricular.
school property outside of
Yeah,
school
there was another case that was off school property where they burned a cross on
Okay.
on their parents' property.
Okay. So if it's on school property, I would say the argument is somewhat, maybe, right? Because a lot of it depends on what are the rules that everybody agreed to before they attended school. What are the current laws say? Now, if we wanted to just break it down and say in simplest terms, should libertarians defend students' right to free speech to be able to say ugly and nasty things? I'm going to say yes. And let me read a quote here. The trouble with fighting for human freedom is that one spends most of one's time defending scoundrels. For it is against scoundrels that oppressive laws are first aimed. And oppression must be stopped at the beginning if it is to be stopped at all. So absolutely, I would defend somebody's right to wave a Confederate flag. I would absolutely defend their right to burn a cross on their own property, because that is the understanding that I have. Property rights, it is their property. They can say something ugly and nasty that we all agree is ugly and nasty, or they can say something that is ugly and nasty that maybe perhaps only some of us think that is ugly and nasty. Now, as to Jeremiah talking about prioritizing, absolutely. I think Menken's quote, I think he addresses the priority. If you do not prioritize it with the easiest targets, then you set yourself up to be a target later.
Am I to give a rebuttal?
Yes, rebuttals are in order here. Jeremiah.
So here's the deal, though. There are many scoundrels. There are many people who need help. There are many people who the Libertarian Party does not serve, who the Libertarian Party is ignoring. There are people being poisoned in Memphis right now by Elon Musk and a state-sanctioned, state-sponsored, state-funded data center epidemic. Instead of fighting for those people, they defend people like Blackburn in, principle, even though they've previously claimed to hate her, by not saying anything about this issue in the Libertarian Party of Tennessee. Instead, they're prioritizing going against the Libertarian Party Alliance, with whom I have significant issues myself, for entirely asinine reasons. I'm struggling to avoid cussing. I'll hope you know that, because that is my normal SoCal millennial vernacular. But
We cleared that. You're good.
I'll just say asinine for the purposes of this particular assessment. And they ignore entirely the people who are being poisoned, having their water soaked up and destroyed by this data center, having their energy bills jacked up so that they can be stolen from effectively by this statist institution. They aren't saying anything about that because, frankly, they side with people like Elon Musk in much of his bigotry, and that's why they're opposing people that they claim to be leftist infiltrators over that. There are many scoundrels, and Elon Musk is a prime example of one of these scoundrels using bigotry to advance the levers of the state. So when it comes to it, you can say that we should defend scoundrels first, but what of the alleged scoundrels in the Democrat Party? The people in the blue area that was just redistricted, the last bastion of blue in Tennessee was Memphis. And they were starting to use that last bastion of blue in order to oppose Elon Musk and the data centers. But Elon Musk promised a Hyperloop in Nashville. And this is a big, sweeping public infrastructure project that the governor can use to say that he's being based. And so he's not doing anything libertarian. In fact, he's doing quite the opposite. He's defending the anti-libertarian bigoted scoundrels so that he can plant data centers for Mecha Hitler in Memphis. And the Libertarian Party of Tennessee is not defending the people who are being poisoned, killed, robbed, and otherwise, aggressed upon by Elon Musk. Instead, they are supporting the scoundrel Elon Musk by backing his culture war agenda and by not saying anything against him and the redistricting of Memphis to now 3 separate districts for a single city. The idea that we don't have, the ability to prioritize scoundrels because we also don't prioritize certain scoundrels is abhorrent. We have limited resources as people and limited lives as carbon-based entities on this oblate spheroid. Ultimately, we don't have time to go and defend every scoundrel. And if the Libertarian Party is only consistently ever seen defending the kind of scoundrel that does anti-libertarian garbage like authoritarian right-wing things, fascism, and the like, then we will be nothing more than tools of authoritarianism. So I ask you to reprioritize in this regard. For instance, yes, we should free crypto prisoners. There are plenty of them that should be. The guy who made the samurai wallet, absolutely free that guy. But I don't care at all about Ian Freeman, who routinely defends pedophilia, and the only reason he got caught for any of this stuff was because his computer popped on a child porn website. I don't care if that person loses what he has while he fundamentally advocates aggression in other ways. I would rather focus our limited time and resources on people who actually need it. And so many people in the far right of libertarian circles would rather focus on the bigots, would rather enable people like Toad and, Bryce to run their white power organizations. Ultimately, we need to understand the threat here. And the threat is not prioritizing a better scoundrel.
Is this
Yep.
where I respond again?
Yes.
Okay, so it sounds to me like this is just a laundry list of complaints about libertarians. And I do believe that this is a debate on whether or not, broadly speaking, bigotry is permissible, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but let me address just in brief, when it comes to time, we all have 24 hours a day. We all have 7 days a week. We all have 365 and a quarter days out of the year. And we all have self-ownership, which means I can choose how to spend my time as I see fit. And I can choose to say, well, I'm going to spend my time defending person A over person B for whatever reason that I choose. And if somebody wants to come along and say, hey, I got an argument for you. I think you should, instead of defending person B, you should defend, or person A, you should defend person B. That is how things work. But the question that was posed was not, hey, should we prioritize some kids over this particular action, right? Because if we have, in order to make a decision like that, well, I would have to go in and dig in and see if I come to the same conclusion that Jeremiah has or anybody else, for which I am not particularly familiar with this particular data center, so I couldn't speak to that. But the question was really focused and narrow on, hey, should we prioritize defending somebody's freedom of speech? Well, yeah, I generally tend to agree. Because at the end of the day, if we don't have freedom of speech, then how do we talk to people? How do we communicate? How do we convince people of any idea? How do we convince somebody that, hey, you should actually defend my pet project, not yours? So that's how I would respond to that, and just simply say, my time is mine. I will use it how I see fit. And if others disagree, well, they're more than welcome to convince me otherwise.
So why do you see it fit that way would be the question I would ask. Because ultimately, when it comes down to it, you can say that you can do it for whatever reason you want. But the question is whether or not that reason comports with libertarianism. Because if this bigotry is permissible in libertarianism, then it's, totally defensible from that standpoint. You would be able to tell me that what you're doing advances liberty itself. If this is not, then you would simply be advancing the principle of free speech with people who, for instance, didn't believe in it, like the KKK or the Confederacy, notorious censorship advocates who supported the ideals of various laws against expression, various riots and lynchings and things like that opposed certain artistic expression. Hitler learned a lot of what he learned from America and how they treated Black people and the natives. And ultimately, when it comes down to it, asking whether or not defending bigotry, defending somebody's free speech to be a bigot is permissible in libertarianism is a separate question as to whether or not that bigot would be considered a libertarian. And anybody who supports the CSA is not. Anybody who supports the Klan is not.
DL, do you have a response to that?
Let's see. Earlier, I mentioned Dia Khan. She is the she is a Muslim. I think she's also British, but she's a Muslim filmmaker, and she made a film called White Right Meeting the Enemy, I believe. And she actually talked to a guy out of Jacksonville here, a self-avowed racist, Klan member, dragon, something, I don't know, some position, I don't really know. But what was interesting about that is that she was later on a different podcast, and she was talking about her experience. And she was discussing, she admitted that she had her own preconceptions about men like him that were flat, caricatured, and unfair. And her prejudice against, quote, people like him was also incorrect. And I think that should give us a little bit of pause, because being intolerant of bigots carries the exact same risk that Jeremiah is warning about. It encourages people to label others as undesirables or bigots or whatever, right? And there doesn't seem to be any end to that. And then it justifies excluding them, purging them, using institutional powers to keep them from spaces, so on and so forth, right? It puts you in the same place as what you're claiming allowing bigotry does. So, hey, you don't want authoritarianism? Well, how do you get rid of all of these people if there's so many of them? Elon Musk, he's got lots of supporters. He's got lots of money. He's got lots of employees. There are a lot of people that support him. In order to go against him, I also have to go against, to some degree, many of the people that support him. To what end? I think the problem here is that we're getting buried into a particular topic and say, hey, this is my pet project. We should deal with this project. And well, these guys over here, they're not real libertarians, and their free speech, well, they're just using it, abysmally. So therefore, I'm not going to protect them. I'm going to protect the downtrodden. That's exactly the claim that every left-leaning authoritarian does, and many right-leaning authoritarians do. They simply pick their victim of choice. And they say, well, I got to defend this victim, whether they're a victim or not. And then they put in the position, they utilize the positions of power to make that happen. So I think my example of saying, hey, bring this down to the bare bones, to the most simplest thing, and then everybody can choose what speaks to them. For some people, environment may speak to them. And so they'll go and they'll complain about the data centers that perhaps are doing things wrong, that are perhaps violating people's rights. People who care about property rights might do the same thing. Hey, you're damaging the land here, and you're creating problems with other people. And then yet other people might say, I'm really passionate about just speech. We have First Amendment lawyers. They do it all the time. So I don't think it's a workable proposition what Jeremiah is offering. I think it's just simply doing the exact same thing, or at least positioning people to engage in the very same behaviors that he claims to want to avoid.
I want to ask a question here, and just to get a little bit of more clarification. I think, Dale, you kind of touched upon this in an earlier statement, but I want to understand, do you make a distinction between libertarianism in this debate that we're having and the Libertarian Party?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm going to ask kind of a follow-up then of where do you draw that line?
Of what? Between libertarianism and the Libertarian Party?
Yeah, well, I mean, with bigotry itself, where does the line kind of get in there? And I guess let me take it a little bit differently. What is the difference? What do you view that as different between the Libertarian Party and libertarianism? So you think the Libertarian Party should be free to ostracize,
Yes.
for example, if something is too bigoted or something that is bigoted, that we should be able to say, no, you're not welcome in the Libertarian Party anymore. Whereas you believe that libertarianism is more general and that we shouldn't gatekeep. Am I understanding that correct?
Yes, that is absolutely correct. So let's take a look at the Libertarian Party first. Libertarian Party is simply a body of people that have come together with a particular purpose, and they have outlined this is the structure under which we will operate. They have their governing documents that say, hey, this is what we're going to do. In their particular case, the delegates are basically kings. So the delegates can come together and they can argue and say, all right, we want this or we don't want this. And we've done this. We've seen this over the many years of the Libertarian Party's existence. So for instance, the speaking to bigotry, there was that bigotry plank, if you will, that was reworded back in, I think, 2022. And that was certain words were removed. Other words were put in its place. If you dig back through the history, you'll find out, I think that it's less than 50% of the entire Libertarian Party's existence. That particular set of words actually appeared in the platform. And so it's been taken out, put it back in, taken out, so on and so forth, along with many other things, all by the hand of the delegates. Now, some other organizations, they may not operate like that. They may operate and say, all right, we're going to vest many of the decisions in a small group of people, perhaps a board. The board's going to manage all of this, and they don't really need to come to the body for certain decisions. And then you have others like, say, a private business where perhaps it's just the owner who gets to make the decision, or maybe there's shareholders or what have you. So whatever the entity is, the collection of people and how they have set themselves up to be governed, that is how I would argue and say they can make the decision whether or not something A meets their vision of what it means to be bigoted, and then what to do about it. Now, when it comes to libertarianism, that is just a broad idea. And the problem that I have with trying to gatekeep a broad idea is, and as every libertarian knows, we have way too many disagreements on everything, right? On policy, on definitions. People will argue all day long about what the definition of the non-aggression principle should be, right? And some people will say, hey, it's not enough. Other people will say it's totally sufficient. And because of that, when we get mired into worrying about all these little small things, it becomes we cannot do business of liberty, unless we have perfected our organization or our movement. And we see where that's gotten us. It's not gotten us very far, because that's what we've been doing for at least the last 50 years. So at this point, it's time to change and to say, perhaps we are worried way too much about way too many details, not in the context of the party, but in the context of libertarianism and what the philosophy should and should not mean.
Do you see slavery, for instance, just to fully get your honest take here before I proceed? Do you see slavery, for instance, as a pet issue or something small? Or do you think that it's a fundamental question of whether or not somebody supports aggression, that they might support slavery?
It's small today, at least in America, because slavery, as most people understand it, the forced labor of other people, the physical forced labor, we're not talking about nuanced definitions where we say, well, you have to go to work in order to buy food, so therefore you are forced, right? You've always had, ever since mankind has existed, we have been forced to go find resources. So I would reject those level of definitions of slavery and narrow it down to what the common man would understand, which is you snatch somebody up and you force them into labor and you steal their wages.
You mean like Kamala Harris in her prison industrial complex, where she was routinely snatching people up and forcing them to work for her?
Yes. Yes,
So we
because
do have modern
he
slavery.
was defrauding people out of their freedoms by
So we do have modern
enhancing
slavery.
the problem, basically making things up or using her power to impose punishments that far exceeded what the crime was.
So we do have modern slavery.
No, I wouldn't say we have modern slavery
You
in
don't
the
think prison
context
slave labor
because
exists?
I'm sorry.
You don't think prison slave labor exists?
I think that it is a different. I think again. So when we look at slavery, we say what do we understand slavery to be? We're forcing somebody. We're grabbing them. We're forcing them for no particular reason whatsoever
Oh, there's
to
plenty
do
of
labor,
reasons.
huh?
There was plenty of reasons. And in fact, the 13th Amendment was not an abolishment of slavery. It said that slavery would be abolished except as punishment for a crime. And this allowed for the influx of Jim Crow legislation. It allowed for a significant amount of bigotry to allow for a significant amount of people to be snatched up and forced to work. The CSA was designed to defend this sort of institution, and many downflows from the CSA were politicians who still supported that and wanted to see a modern day version of it for their modern day. And ultimately, anybody who supports the CSA, anybody who supports that sort of thing, anybody who supports Kamala Harris to a certain extent, supports slavery. Because
I never
ultimately,
supported her, so
I'm not saying you did. I'm talking about a variety of people who are not you. I'm speaking to broader issues and whether or not these people would be considered permissible in libertarianism, whether or not these people would be considered libertarians. And no, they wouldn't be, not by any logical stretch. And I don't think by any logical stretch one could consider these things to be pet issues or small, or in the past, especially since the very devices that build those data centers are foundationally principled on slavery, modern day slavery, paying people barely anything so that they can go mine the resources, using the force of government and wars and regime changes to steal the land and occupy territories. All of the machinery that is at the base of the modern industrial landscape is rooted in some form of slavery. So as libertarians, we should definitely oppose that. These people are oftentimes forced by a variety of ways and in a variety of circumstances, and sometimes literally physically forced to get back to work. They are not allowed to leave. Oftentimes their passports are shredded or their families are, threatened with local violence. And that's how we get the chips for our computers. So I would say that modern day slavery is in fact bigger than ever. We have a bigger plantation, we have more people under the whip, and we have physically in America a significant stock of prisoners who are doing that in a domestic form. RFK Jr., in fact, wanted to put them on labor farms just for having ADHD instead of taking medication for it. He thinks that would be the superior alternative. And so when it comes down to it, we're not dealing with some small distant issue. And I don't see a distinction between a party that is supposed to represent a libertarian mentality and the movement in general. If a libertarian party is not itself libertarian, then it is not a libertarian party at all. And one would say, for instance, that if it is, if it has either been instrumental in creating the world that we have now, or it has been powerless to prevent it. Either way, it is unfit to exist. That is, unless the Libertarian Party is capable of pulling itself up by its bootstraps and proverbially getting rid of the things holding it down. Most notably, the people who are advocating for the authoritarian mentalities that are rooted in bigotry. The ultimate truth here is that bigotry itself, as a notion, precludes the idea of being an honest adversary. It precludes the idea of being an ethical actor, and it instead circumvents all of that toward the end of fundamentally anti-libertarian ends. And that's why people in libertarian circles can call things like, Pinochet's reign, the miracle of Chile. It's why people in libertarian circles can, for instance, like the So to Speak caucus, say that that Germany was just getting rid of people who don't belong, and that if they're allowed to remain, the future of Germany will be destroyed, and so will its culture. endorsing the actions of Erwin Rommel and a variety of other Nazis. The ultimate truth is that when you allow bigots, you allow the kinds of things that their ideals permeate. And just to put a really fine cap on this, the idea that you can, equivocate effectively the bigot with defense of the bigot's ability to be a bigot from a libertarian perspective, is it feels like a dodge. Because what we're discussing here is whether or not that bigot could call themselves a libertarian. And I would challenge you to find a single example of a bigot that is actually functionally doing what libertarianism says they should, and following the non-aggression principle, having a society that does so. I don't think you can. And that's why the idea that because I'm saying certain people should be excluded or are excluded by default from libertarianism, which is a voluntary arrangement with a set of strictures in order to maintain one's status as a libertarian, implies that it's up to me and not up to them to follow those strictures, not up to them to be a libertarian and not a libertarian as accurately labelable by somebody who knows the strictures and knows people who fall without. I think that this is a fundamentally fallacious approach to equivocate the idea of opposing bigotry with being a bigot, because bigotry itself is irrational. And if I can form a rational basis for my statements that certain people are not being rational, then I can accurately state that those people's irrational beliefs are excluded from a philosophy that requires a certain level of rationalism. And if not, then there's no point to this or any other debate or any other intellectual pursuit, because we can never state what isn't, only say that anything that says that which isn't is automatically the same as anything else that says that which isn't. Everybody is equally correct and equally incorrect under that framework, and there is no actual statements of first principles, no follow-through, and no robustness. And in doing so, you sacrifice the entire principle of libertarianism, because what's to say that any sort of form of authoritarianism is not itself libertarian?
Do I need to go? Or I'm trying to figure out the format here.
If you would like to, you can respond to that.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Let me ask. Let me think about how I want to phrase my question here.
Just schizo ranted at you. Apologies.
If we exclude people for either being bigots or supporting bigots or engaging in bigoted behavior, why would there be any value in anyone doing anything? So let me kind of put some context to that question. A moment ago, you said, hey, there's computer chips and forced slavery. But we're all sitting here on a podcast with screens, cell phones, microphones, things that have microchips in them. We are contributing to this.
Absolutely.
And so if you are going to make a claim that, hey, you guys can't because you said something nasty using the chips that somebody was forced into slavery, and slavery, as you stated, was the big deal, right? You said, hey, like, this is a big deal. It's not something tiny, because look at all these areas that I was able to take scope creep and just say, well, this and this and this and this, right? Well, at that point, there is no end and there is no point. Everything you said is great for maybe philosophy class, but at the end of the day, how does it help my neighbor? How does it help the Black family, the marginalized family down the road? How does it help them to go around in circles to the point where we've basically labeled everything being touched by bigotry, but we can't have bigotry? At some point, we have to look and say, we're just talking like we're in philosophy class, and either we're out to help real people or we're out to hear ourselves talk.
So let me ask you, would it be better, and this is your choice, you see somebody with a gun that is powerful enough to shoot through the brains of two people in a row. It's like a decent speed, decent caliber. They've got it perfectly aimed to shoot through the brains of two people. And you know these people are innocent, they don't deserve that. And you know that this person is about to pull the trigger. You have just enough time to push one person out of the way. Would you do that?
Perhaps, but I'm sorry. How did that answer my question? See, this is
It's about
this is what I mean. We're engaging in philosophy class. Like, oh, you asked the question, let me
This
answer
is
a
a
question.
philosophy class. Is libertarianism a philosophy, or is it not?
What I talked about when I said self-ownership and when I said the non-aggression principle, when I said freedom of association, those aren't just philosophical things. Those are real things that we engage in every single day.
And real people really die every single
Not
day
by
as the
standing
result of our
side by
actions.
side with made up ideas about, okay, well, this person,
But this is a made-up
mean-
idea. The person down your street is a made-up idea. You hypotheticalize
no,
them. Why can't I
no,
hypotheticalize
so
this
you're
other
saying
person?
there are no black people that are struggling right now. Is that what you're telling me? Because I'm telling
no, I
you
mean,
that there are not two
there are
people
people.
standing there waiting for me to intervene while somebody has a gun that can shoot through both of their brains.
So you're
That is a
you're
hypothetical
not
that's
going to
made up.
address the concern. Okay, so let's go with something primary here. You know that one company has much more ethical practices, and that company maybe enslaves 30 children versus 60 children. Would you go with the company that enslaved 60 children or 30 children?
There's not enough information for that.
Why not?
Because I don't know what I need. I don't know what the problem is. I don't know what I'm doing. All I know is that 30 children, 60 children. That's it. This is
Okay.
These are this
So
is the
let's say
problem with
one,
this philosophy
except it's not,
embarkment.
because I'm about to get specific. So if we talk about these sorts of things, there are practical, real world, physical, personal examples of all of this.
Talk
For
about
instance,
practical things instead of hypotheticals, but okay.
sure, because the hypothetical addresses all the potential practicals. That's the point of philosophy. So either way, to get to the drilled down roots here, if, for instance, there are microchips that can be made in America, you reduce the overall amount of like non-union jobs. You reduce the overall amount of jobs that are being performed by child laborers, by people who are forced by their circumstances to work in a third world sweatshop. So there should, if you have the opportunity to buy a board that is soldered in America, you have the opportunity to have a better formed product, a product that enslaved less people. I would assume that you would buy the one that is made in America rather than the one that's made in, for instance, North Korea.
Perhaps. But how do you do
Okay.
that? How do you move a company that you don't own to the United States to engage in ethical practices that you believe are ethical?
I'm not recommending that I move anything. See, that would be a move of the goalpost, because what we're discussing here is whether or not I'm ethical for buying what I buy and doing what I do involving this sort of thing. And so what I'm saying is that everything is a gradient. Everything is a scale of suffering, and there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. Really, routinely, people ignore all of the suffering that is caused by their particular mode of consumption. And really routinely, that coincides with bigotry, because bigots will oftentimes use those machines and the machinery of supremacy and colonialism and imperialism to spread their roots out to basically anywhere that will have them and anywhere that will not have them by way of force and regime change. And so ultimately, what I'm saying is that if these things exist, these chips, these, machines that we could use for one thing or another, and I use my technology, my access to it, to reduce the suffering of other people as much as possible, that's basically as well as I can do. And when it comes down to it, it's not the same as, for instance, me running a podcast like Andrew Tate, where I help a bunch of people understand how to rape girls. It's not all the same use of the technology. It's like different uses, different scales, different suffering, and therefore different judgments upon all of it. And if we're going to be nuanced and reasonable, we can't just totalize like this. We can't say that being an anti-bigot is in the same frame as being a bigot, because both are going to use some form of bigotry. Yes, I understand that there's going to be some form of terrible like results from my actions, and I own that. And I'm trying to reduce that as much as possible. As somebody who lives in this country under this economic model, I can't really fully eliminate it, but what I can do is understand it. And that's what bigots refuse to do. Bigots, by their definition, are irrational and repugnant. The definition of bigotry in any dictionary and in the etymology and in any sort of stricture of it isn't trying to understand. And therefore, the person who tries to understand is definitionally not a bigot. The person who tries to understand and operate better is doing the opposite of bigotry, which libertarianism is exactly that. It's trying to understand and do better. And if it's not, then they're not fighting for liberty and therefore aren't libertarian at all.
I see. So let me ask you then. Let's take New Hampshire. I think we all agree that New Hampshire, they say some pretty terrible things. The New Hampshire Libertarian Party, at least on their social media, they say some pretty. I think we agree, right? We can agree that they say some pretty nasty things.
Of course, like they just called for the mass death of all.
I don't need to know specifics, but we just agree that they say some pretty nasty things. Yes. And we would agree that some of those things would definitely constitute by either of our definitions of bigotry as bigoted. Yes? Okay.
Absolutely.
Walk me through how excluding New Hampshire, disaffiliating them, calling, saying, hey, you're not a libertarian. And then they walk away and say, you're right, I guess I'm not a libertarian. And they go away. Walk me through from there to how you improve the lives of some child over in North Korea or wherever. Walk me through that process. I don't want hypotheticals. I want you to walk me through this process, how you are going to save the children in some other country who are being forced labor, which, by the way, if we really want to get into it, a lot of those families absolutely depend on the labor that they actually have. So, there is a consequence by taking that labor away from them. But that's beside the point. Walk me through it.
All right. So the first thing is I would advise everybody who's watching this to read 2 books. You recommended some authors earlier.
Right, so we're going to read our way to liberty. Got it?
Well, absolutely. Knowledge is
we're going to read our way to liberty.
If we don't have the fundamental knowledge to actually address these problems, then there's no point in any of this. Like, there's no point to this podcast if the exchange of information can't help. And I don't mean just this episode. I mean the whole thing. So, if we're going to do the author thing, I recommend Bertram Gross, Friendly Fascism. I also recommend Naomi Klein's Shock Doctrine. And I recommend both of those for understanding how the neoliberal machine has formed the basis for modern day fascism and the machines into which we're all forced. Through various projects of colonialism, imperialism, regime change, and the like, Western capitalism has forced itself as the model that the entire world has to rely on. Rothbard admitted to this as well. He called it state capitalism. And ultimately, when it comes down to it, enabling that is only going to increase the amount of suffering by its own strictures. And so when it comes to New Hampshire, for instance, and their consistent support of authoritarian politicians and policies, and the sorts of downflows in libertarian circles for doing the same thing in other circles, if we exclude the sorts of people who do that, and instead offer solidarity and intersectionality with the people who are oppressed, that might offer people a greater sense of confidence in the libertarian movement in general, so that the worst libertarians get replaced by better libertarians, and so that the non-libertarians get replaced by actual libertarians. What we're dealing with here is a fundamental foundational issue. And so if we start to do that, and if we start to build this solidarity, boycotts work, unions work, the kinds of things where people can increase their standards of living and the ability for their common worker to, thrive in the present day landscape, work. Now, whether or not you want to endorse certain ones, that would be up to you. I would advise not completely wholesale rejecting it, because many of the best libertarian advances have come from unions. But, and you know, Lysander Spooner would agree, having been a wobbly. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, this has a downflow effect. It has a very practical effect. Because if we start to enable the sorts of people who are capital critical, rather than the people who would consistently enable state capitalism and tell people that the cops should be unleashed, and that the gays should be slaughtered, and that anybody who they don't like is a leftist and should be murdered, celebrating people like Pinochet in doing so, those sorts of people are only hindrances to the sorts of people who would actually fight the machine. And in doing so, in sort of minding our P's and Q's in this regard and handling the issues of the people in question, we would have the ability to slowly erode the foundation of a lot of these authoritarian mentalities and a lot of the movements that downflow from that. And it's the only way to help those people, because foreign interventionism, that is enabled by people like Donald Trump. It's enabled by people like George Bush, you know, Obama, Biden. They're all part of the neoliberal matrix. They're all part of this global fascist regime. It's the reason Trump was so buddy-buddy with WEF. And when it comes down to it, they will back whichever genocidal evil regime possible, as long as it allows them to maintain their position and strengthen their power and profit. Trump is enabling the genocide in Israel and sending US troops to die in Iran so that he can murder a bunch of people who should not be murdered. This is the direct downflow result of people like New Hampshire and their bigoted opinions on trans people, migrants, and crime, and a variety of other things, helping install him. If we get rid of people like that, we get rid of these sorts of rot that fundamentally result in anti-libertarian conclusions. And while we're at it, we get rid of the sorts of people who would do regime change and ensure that there can be no alternate model that upsets the current order as it regards trade and international supply chain routes. These things are built by the present system. They're not an accident. And if we can get people in who understand that, then maybe we can do something about it.
Jeremiah, a follow-up to that is, how do we ostracize the bigots? So we know, like, the Libertarian Party can just disaffiliate someone. We can say we don't, but how do we as libertarians, how do you ostracize the bigots? Is that possible to do? If somebody wants to call themselves libertarians, how do you stop them from doing that?
Well, you don't. What? You don't stop someone from calling it. You just say, no, you aren't.
But
you say, you aren't.
As a fault,
like, they can call themselves libertarians all they want. If Libertarian Party of New Hampshire wants to perpetually forever call themselves libertarians, that's their choice. We have to understand on a personal level, though, that that's not the way it is. And the way ostracism works is, you say, either you live by your own principles or you're not allowed in the organization. The Libertarian Party of New Hampshire calling for mass murder today is enough to say, you don't belong in our organization anymore. The Libertarian Party of New Hampshire doing it before is enough to say, you don't belong in our organization anymore. The Libertarian Party of New Hampshire supporting a variety of Nazis and literally being sponsored by an organization of Nazis at their previous convention before this year is enough to say, you don't belong in our organization anymore. They're violating the platform on a daily basis. They're violating the thing that they agreed to, the contract of free association that they agreed to on a daily basis. And so, yes, sure, disaffiliate. And if you can't, then recognize that the Libertarian Party itself is fundamentally useless to the libertarian movement. If you're not going to remove people physically, so to speak, who do not contribute to the libertarian social order you say is garnered by the things in your platform, then your platform means nothing, and so does the rest of your organization.
Am I good?
Yeah. Deal with what?
Okay.
I will shut up for a very long time because I've been yapping forever.
You're good. So that's a lot of hopeful, because first you got to get people to read a book, 2 books actually. Hey, here's 2 books. You need to read them. so that you will come to a better understanding. You got to hope that they read the books. Then you have to hope that they come to the conclusion. Then you're going to have to hope that they're going to do something about it in the direction that you want to go. Then you're going to have to hope that they have come to the conclusion, they start doing the things about it, and then they continue to do it, right? And you're going to have to hope that they maybe convince other people. There's a lot of other hope. So let me offer a counterpoint. You make bricks. What? What do you mean make bricks, DL? I told you in the opening. I said that Booker T. Washington, he started a school. And when he started the school, it's documented. He said, hey, we don't have a school. We have to build one. Oh, great. We don't have any bricks. We're going to have to make them. We don't have a kiln. We're going to have to make it. They tried 4 or 5 times before they were finally able to make a kiln, right? All this time, bigotry. Arguably worse than whatever we're seeing from any affiliate right now. Because at that time, you could get away with a whole lot more, and it was socially acceptable. Here, at least we have people saying, hey, that's not cool. That's unacceptable. That's terrible. That's vile, whatever, right? You have that today. You did not have that. So what did they do in the face of real bigotry, real problems right then and there? They said, we're going to become brick makers, not even so that they could get rid of bigotry. They just said, we need a damn school. So they built a school, and then they got really good at it. And they said, hey, maybe you want to buy some bricks. And then people said, you know what? You're right. And it's documented if you read his book, and I know I'm suggesting a book as well, but if we go back and we read.
I'm glad.
I'm sorry?
I'm glad. And I won't be a
Right.
bigot. I'll definitely check that book out because bigotry is irrational and repugnant.
Up From Slavery is the book. So if we go back and we read, we find out that all they didn't have any philosophy. They weren't trying to fight capitalism. They weren't trying to fight these strictures and structures and everything else that is set up in the system. Many of those things were already there, and they had a very bad lot. All they did was simply be excellent. They made it so they could not be ignored. And we see that over and over and over again. So I look at it and I say, when I come to the table and I say the answer is those 3 pillars, to say, look, let's support people's self-ownership. Let's support non-aggression, their right to not be aggressed against. Let's support the non-aggression principle, which is freedom from force, the threat of force, fraud, right? And then freedom of association, which they had. You were free to associate on any grounds you want. You could say, I'm not going to talk to me some black people because I think they're whatever, right? Back in those days. And yet they were able to overcome it without this long chain of, oh my God, you're not a real libertarian. I've got to convince you that you're not so that you'll go away. They did it far more simple. And this is the point that I think that we're missing here. And this is why I'm criticizing this whole philosophy, because at the end of the day, we have documented evidence over and over and over of people who were really living a bad light. And they were able to overcome to some degree, even given the circumstances that they were in. Circumstances today are far better. So for me, I look at it and I say, this is all nice and fine. If we wanted to argue philosophy, it's not really my thing. I am more of a practical person. I look out and I say, hey, there's a black family down the road, not particularly in my neighborhood, but down the road, there's a black family that's suffering. How can I help them today?
Yes.
Not by reading a book. I can't imagine going to somebody who is struggling and saying, I'm going to help you as soon as I read these 2 books, and then convince other people that they're not really libertarians. And then eventually we're going to get this factory. We're getting this out of Vietnam where all these poor little children, they're getting harmed, which arguably is true. I'm not disputing that. But the problem is I've got people right in front of me right now, right today, that I can help improve their lives by 3 simple concepts.
So I'll just start from practical principles here, because I made a note in the beginning when you stated this particular case. Buying someone's bricks does not mean one will not throw them at the seller. In the end run of it, these people can participate in the capital structure and be certainly good sellers of bricks, but that does not guarantee their place in the system. That does not guarantee that the long-term result of this will not be people building strongholds with the bricks they sell and using them as bases of operations against their basic fundamental human freedoms. Now, you can hope, if you want to say hope, that these bricks will only go to people who are gradually convinced of non-racism, but that is historically untrue. As an example, Jews have historically been barred from a significant amount of professions where they are. And in doing so, these Jews had formed significant understandings of financial advice. They were allowed in many places and in many ways to do those activities, engage in those professions, because that's basically all they were allowed to do. And now that there are so many Jews in finance, there's people like LPNH who make posts claiming that the Jews are in control of everything because of that, ignoring, that there are pretty equal amounts of Irish people, British people, a variety of others that I could mention. Saudis are the, single richest royal family on the planet. Ignoring the irrationality and repugnance of anti-Semitism for a moment, we can say definitively that the people in the modern context are throwing the bricks back at the Jews. No, not all Jews are, equal in this regard, and many of them are destroying brick by brick Palestinian homes. And I'm not trying to say that, I support the Zionist experiment. I'm not trying to say I support any sort of ethnic homogeneity in finance or any other institution. But what I am suggesting is they tried to make bricks, and those bricks were thrown at them. The last profession that they were allowed to do in many contexts is now being used against them because there's so much of them in it. This is one example. Another example would be the fact that plenty of Black people have tried to make bricks of their own, most notably Black Wall Street. And Black Wall Street itself was an experiment in trying to get Black people what they were owed, a life of freedom, liberty, participation in the system, being upstanding members of society, and trying to make the bricks to sell to the white man. That didn't work. In the end run, it was torched. And people who try to completely separate from the system, they're like, well, we don't want any of this. We're going to start our own, colony in the middle of Philadelphia. And we're going to run it our way. And we're going to build bricks for our people. Those people violated the white supremacist order and were torched in a many block radius that we just experienced the anniversary of for the Philadelphia Move bombing. There are many examples I could list of these sorts of projects being utterly destroyed by bigotry, by the hope being dashed. So for you to say that mine relies on hope, absolutely. I'm also a pretty negative person. You might have guessed. I don't exactly present as an overwhelming force of cheer, and I understand that. I'm a negative person. I don't think we'll get to anarchy. In fact, I routinely say this exact line, that we are going to experience rivers of blood and years of darkness and a fiery apocalypse, the likes of which will make Revelations look like a children's story. I think that's coming. I think man's inhumanity to man is going to destroy all men. And I think we're heading there largely because of bigotry, because people aren't willing to understand each other. So the ultimate truth of this is, we're in those end times. We're watching the bigots win. We're watching the practical results of the bricklayers and brick builders not succeeding against other bricklayers and brick builders who are actually building the foundation for this civilization. Most notably, one who, built bricks for part of his living with the Boring Company, selling those bricks so that he could fund parts of a Hyperloop that turned out to be a scam, a Hyperloop that he is now scamming Nashville with so that he can poison Memphis by having it cut into 3 different districts, as an example. So what I'm trying to say here is that, yes, you can find examples of liberalism, and you can be optimistic that those examples will represent some statistical norm in the future. But here's the deal. In order for that to happen, those people didn't stop. It didn't continue to be bigots. They didn't continue to say that these people must be worse because they can't make something equal to or better than the white man. They had to admit they were wrong to some extent. And if bigots are not willing to admit that they were wrong to some extent, then they will not be the patron of the black brick maker. They will be the patron of the brick maker that suits their biases, that soothes their racist consciences. And they will forever be that patron to that establishment. And in doing so, create a very unmovable class. There's middle grounders. There's people on the fence. There's people who actually might be reachable. But those people might be reachable to bring them over to libertarianism. People who want those black people to fail because they're black and not because their products are meritocratically inferior. People who, in doing so, defend age-old institutions that would have brutalized them prior to this, still want them brutalized. Even if they don't fundamentally aggress themselves, they are fundamentally aggressive-minded. And they fundamentally want these people destroyed anyway. And the question is libertarianism a philosophy? And that question has already been answered, yes. Libertarianism is a philosophy, and a philosophy that is incompatible with this aggressionist mentality.
It's also a philosophy that was unable to prevent the things that you're complaining about now. But I'm actually glad that you brought up Black Wall Street, Tulsa, Oklahoma, because let's dive into that story just a little bit more. Was bigotry at play? Absolutely. But if you remember, at the very beginning of the show, I said, hey, I think we can address society's problems through self-ownership, through non-aggression, and through freedom of association. So here's what happened with Black Wall Street. You had a young man, Mr. Rowland. He was accused of whistling or flirting with a young woman, white woman, and he was taken into custody, and then a mob formed of white men demanding justice, demanding martial justice at their hands. And so then a black mob formed. And then at some point, somebody gave a shot, and then all hell broke loose. Was it the white person that did it? I don't know. It's contested. But somebody gave a shot, all hell broke loose. They went and they destroyed 35 square blocks of Tulsa, Oklahoma, burned it down. And I believe somewhere between 36 and 39 people were killed or injured or some variation thereof. Okay. So when I say that, when I'm arguing this point and saying, hey, it's great to talk about philosophy, but at the end of the day, philosophy, that doesn't save people. What would have saved people, which I'm arguing for and saying, hey, the bare bones to focus on self-ownership, non-aggression, freedom of association. You don't have to hang out. You don't have to associate with Mr. Rowland. You can say, I don't want you working in my business. I thought you whistled at a white girl. That's fine, but you can't touch him. And let's point out that after that incident, not a single white person was brought to justice. Not a single one. That was a failure of the non-aggression principle, is a violation of the non-aggression principle, violation of self-ownership, and to some degree, a violation of freedom of association. Because presumably, and I'm making an assumption here, but presumably there were whites who were willing to work with black people, willing to perhaps hire Mr. Rowland, who, by the way, was exonerated after it was all said and done. So at the end of the day, the argument here that I am bringing to the table to say that, hey, bigotry is permissible. It is, because there are better ways to address the ills that plague our society. And I have provided example after example. I've even taken an example that you brought forward and said, here is how the three concepts that I'm saying, if libertarians focused on these, would allow people to live even a shred of a better life. And you're coming to the table telling me you should read some books and we need to tear down capitalism and we got all these structures and blah, blah, blah. It's nice on paper. It doesn't help real people. You haven't demonstrated in an hour and a half now how these ideas have actually benefited real people. And historically, you've just said, oh, well, if you learn this, if we get rid of New Hampshire, well, then we can do all these other things. But all these other things have been done despite even worse than what we see in New Hampshire.
So here's the thing, and it's a multi-part response. First off, you haven't proven that the bigots in and of themselves are the cause of any of this happening in the positive. So I don't have to prove that anti-bigots would improve matters. That isn't the thing under question to begin with at all either. That's a moving of the goalposts. The goalposts are at whether or not it's permissible in libertarianism. And you haven't been able to structurally prove that those bigots' mentalities lead to anything other than anti-libertarianism. In fact, The only examples that you've been able to bring have been of things where people had to become less bigoted to become more libertarian. This proves my point. The only way for these people to acknowledge, the superiority of the black brick is for these people to acknowledge that whites are not inherently superior. It's definitionally a rejection of bigotry on some level to transition to a less bigoted mentality and support the black businesses instead of the white ones on principle. The bigot would say that it doesn't matter whether or not the black brick is better. They would still go with the white brick because it's not a black brick, and those black bricks are inherently inferior. That would be the bigoted approach. You need to be anti-bigoted in order to take the more libertarian stance that these people have the free will to make the better brick, and that we don't believe those people don't have that free will because of their race. Because libertarianism is fundamentally a free will mentality. Without free will, you cannot have self-ownership. Without free will, you cannot have freedom of association. You are to associate with who you are, demographically linked to by default. If you don't, you're not doing your freedom of association. These people only believe in the anti-libertarian strictures. And the only thing that this ever results in is the people who are meritocratically and actually physically objectively better getting thrown to the wayside, getting their businesses torched, getting their village bombed, getting their regime changed, getting a variety of other aggressions that we can all agree are bad, fundamentally, mechanistically, and from a libertarian perspective, bad. You've not been able to actually demonstrate that these people's bigotry itself can result in libertarian outcomes. And given that the question is whether or not they're permissible in libertarianism, not whether libertarians can permit non-libertarians to live their life on their property. That's a separate question. But whether or not these people are permitted within libertarianism, you've not been able to demonstrate a single shred of bigotry that helps libertarianism itself. The only thing you've come even close to doing this on is to somehow conflate being an anti-bigot with being a bigot, and therefore saying that I'm doing the same thing as the cross-burner or the enslaver, which I'm not, demonstrably. So when it comes down to it, the facts on the ground, the actual material existence of improved circumstances only happens when people recognize the flaws and the problems that created the structural backing for those circumstances to exist. And that's bigotry, not libertarianism. They can't coexist philosophically. Now, you can say this isn't, philosophy school. I disagree. I think this is a philosophical question for a philosophical movement rooted in a philosophy. I think the fact that you say the non-aggression principle matters means that you're fundamentally conceding that this is a matter of principle. We are dealing with principles. We are dealing with theory. We are dealing with ideology. And then we are dealing with the practical consequences of those. And you have not been able to, in fact, show me an example of bigotry itself causing libertarian outcomes. The only thing you've been able to do is say that I haven't been able to prove that anti-bigotry does, despite my repeated ability to prove exactly that the more we move toward the spectrum of libertarianism, the more we move away from bigotry, because they're fundamentally polar opposites. Libertarianism is a rational philosophy. It has reasons and logical ones for believing what it does, or it has no ground to stand on at all. And if it does have reasonable reasons for believing what it does, it's fundamentally anti-bigotry.
That's an awful lot of nothing. Because here's at the end of the
Sure.
day, and I know that I'm being hostile in this, in a sense, and I'm not really trying to be hostile at you directly. At the end of the day, I started this conversation by saying, I didn't say that I was going to come in and demonstrate that bigotry would go away. In fact, I made the opposite point. I said that in many of these cases, bigotry didn't go away, but outcomes, tangible outcomes that we can look at and demonstrate, they happened when certain things were in play. So if we continue on through history, what we find is when we violate those three principles, those three concepts that I spoke about early on, When we violate them, that's when we see some of the most egregious violations. Jim Crow laws, the operative word is laws. They were laws that impositioned on people and said, you must keep things segregated, whether you wanted to or not. You had to, right? That's a violation of somebody's property that might have otherwise said, you know what? I don't really think segregation is really necessary. I don't want to do that. And then the only thing that would be necessary would be to ensure that nobody else violated their property, their rights. That means no bricks through the windows, no matter who made them, whether they're made by white people or black people, no bricks through windows. And if you throw a brick through a window, you will be punished. These are the things that didn't happen. So while you're here talking about capitalism and all these strictures, and you haven't named a single moment when any of these have demonstrated even a shred of improvement for the life of real tangible people, I have shown that even without the idea, this is libertarian, this is self-ownership, this is the non-aggression principle, without even knowing these ideas, we have seen that when people are free to interact but have particular boundaries, they will tend toward better behavior. I mean, at the end of the day, we could go down the line over and over and over and say, here's an example, here's an example. Were they perfect? No, they were not. They were not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But those people were real people that had real benefits, that enjoyed those benefits simply from not having certain violations permitted, period. So what I look at is I say, at the end of the day, I'm not interested in debating philosophy. I'm not interested in who can come up with the most clever argument that seems to be the most well constructed. At the end of the day, I want to aim to improve the lives of actual real people that I might pass when I go to the store. That's who I want to deal with. And at the end of the day, the three concepts that I've presented, those things do it. We have evidence, period. I don't know what to say.
So you have evidence. Tell me what evidence that you have that these people were libertarians.
I didn't say
themselves.
They were libertarians. That is you just making stuff up. I didn't say that they were libertarians. I said these concepts existed without people actually identifying the concepts, without somebody saying, hey, we need to have a libertarian society. Somebody just said.
So you don't know that these people believed in self-ownership?
It doesn't matter whether they
so
believe
in
it. That's the point. That is the point.
Well, except it's not your point. You just made the opposite.
No, I didn't.
You said that these people believed in it without these things being stated. You said that these people practice these things without the need for being an anti-bigot libertarian. Yes. But in fact, no, they didn't. And in fact, these people, were practicing certain proto-libertarian mentalities, even in their mentalities of opposing those bigots. They weren't saying that the bigots were fine. They weren't saying that slavery was fine, or that any of the things that the people who hate black people because they're black believe are fine. They weren't co-signing their mentalities. They were opposing their mentalities and offering an alternative. Now, there's modes of resistance. There's nonviolent modes of resistance and violent modes of resistance. These people chose a nonviolent mode of resistance, but they were resisting nonetheless. Otherwise, you would have no actual transition to demonstrate. And in resisting these things, they had highlighted unfavorable circumstances, and they had highlighted an alternative to those unfavorable circumstances. In doing so, they highlighted that the bigotry was not acceptable, and they in fact said that bigotry would not be permissible. They in fact practiced that to such an extent that they would allow white people who were previously bigoted to buy their bricks, to enter their establishment, to interface with the property that they would have previously tried to control with their bigoted mentalities, in order to interface with their nonviolent resistance, in order to say, we are in fact just as capable of making bricks. We are just as capable of being just as fine people, and your bigotry is wrong. And here is material proof of that. That's not nothing. That's proof I'm right. If these people didn't believe that the bigots themselves were an unfavorable circumstance and an unfavorable mentality, they wouldn't have presented an alternative. They wouldn't have said, come to our brick shop where we're not like that, even you, white man, you can come to our brick shop as well. They would have said, that we'll only sell to blacks. We'll only sell to people within our own personal in-group. We'll only sell to people that we believe to be within our mental schema. They would have said something similar to that. And that would be the best possible circumstance for anything that would possibly reject my proposal. But they didn't do that. They in fact said, we're going to be so anti-bigoted to these bigots that they eventually realize what life could be like if they weren't.
Yeah.
That is the only actual reason anything changed, because people recognized the unfavorable circumstance of bigotry and presented the most peaceful possible alternative to this bigotry, and those people accepted that alternative peacefully. That was the actual reality. They presented that bigotry is unfavorable, and they said that this will not be permitted even in our own actions. That's the truth here. The truth here is that the libertarian outcome was wrought by people being so radically anti-bigoted that they changed people's hearts and minds away from their bigotry. The only way that happened is people's change, not them staying bigots.
DL, your response?
I guess I feel like we're just kind of going in circles and we're basically stating the same thing.
I do want to get to closing
Right.
statements here soon, but I wanted you to definitely get a chance to respond to that.
So I'll respond with a follow-up quote here, because I think there's a misunderstanding of how actual people of the time felt, right? And so, like, understandably, no, there was no libertarianism as we understand it today, right? People weren't walking around talking about the non-aggression principle. They weren't walking around talking about, freedom of association, not in those particular terms, but they did understand some of the concepts of being able to be free to engage with people on their own terms. They did understand the concept of being free from aggression from other people. And I think that Jeremiah is presenting this as if, okay, it's more diluted in terms of the outcome than it really was. So here's a quote. After Bessie Coleman's death, since I was using her, one of her fellow pilots, a black man, I can't remember his name. Actually, I take it back. It's William J. Powell. He said, because of Bessie Coleman, we have overcome that which is worse than racial barriers. We have overcome the barriers within ourselves and dared to dream. Now, I want you to remember, this was like in the 1920s. It was very safe to be a bigot. It was very safe to be a racist. And yet, we can find this instance and many other instances where the very people who were affected by these things came to a conclusion that does not fit with what Jeremiah says. Because at the end of the day, they recognized bigotry was not their worst obstacle. It was a big one. And in many cases, it was a dastardly one. But also in many cases, it was not the worst one. Bessie Coleman said it. Who's the other guy that I mentioned? Jackie Robinson. He said something similar, right? A lot of people back in the day when it was safe to be bigoted. It's not as safe to be bigoted today. In some ways it is, but not nearly to the extent that it was historically. And I think what Jeremiah is really fighting against, I don't think he's really fighting for libertarianism, self-ownership, non-aggression. I think he's really just fighting against capitalism and structures that he doesn't like. And then he's framing it in a lot of philosophical language and using the boat of libertarianism as a vehicle. That's what I think is really happening here. And I'm sorry, I know I'm not a philosopher. That's not what I do. I talk about and I address real problems with everyday people as quickly as I can. And I look back through history and I say, how did people before me accomplish this? Oh, they accomplished it through free market trade, even when there was bigotry. Wow. We need to figure out how to get more free market trade so that some of these bigoted barriers can be taken down. That's the direction that I look at. So I'm not trying to prove anything other than those three concepts will build a better world. That is all that I am attempting to prove. And at the end of the day, I look at it and I say, because those things have worked despite bigotry, I'm not too worried about bigotry as long as I can fight for those things. Because I know when I fight for those things, I will start getting the outcomes that I'm looking for, and I will get them within a lifetime, because I've seen that other people got them within their lifetime, not after reading books, not after doing all this convincing of people, not after raging for hours and hours and hours on the internet after everybody. Like I go, Ben, Jeremy Kauffman, New Hampshire, you've raged about name after name after name for 48 hours. Who the hell have you benefited? Who the hell's life is better because of that? Who? Tell me. Name them. No, I want a name. I want you to tell me. John Smith, who lives on Mulberry Lane, he benefited from my work fighting against New Hampshire. Because otherwise, it's just philosophy. It's just your nose in a book, talking high and mighty while other people suffer. That's what it is.
So there is a woman. I'm not going to say her name.
Fair. That's fair. I agree.
There is a woman who was recently at an anti-Trump demonstration, and a bigot wandered through there with a giant American flag, trying to insult, provoke, cause a stir. His entire goal was to provoke people into doing something to him that he could play victim about. That's a primary mode of the bigot, by the way. Chud the Builder is a great example. He, this Trump supporter, wandered backward, and then eventually turned around to see that there were two people standing next to the edge of the sidewalk. He chose to step down off the curb, sort of stumble down off the curb, and go around them to the front rather than going around them to the back. And in the process, the wind caught, because it's next to traffic, one of the protesters' signs and sort of generally pushed it toward this bigot's head, who was doing nothing but spouting bigotry the whole time. I was there with my camera, and entirely non-violently, by the way, used my camera and its objective lens to the truth beyond his bigotry to prove that his claims were untrue when he started to scream that she hit him with her sign. This truth shatters bigotry. When bigots make claims and when bigots build their philosophies and societies, they rely on a rejection of truth. Every single time I've been down there with my camera at these protests, I've been able to capture objectively the actual reality that's on the ground there. I've been able to help neighbors get accountability when people are actually violent to them. And I've been able to help not only that, but help get their message out there so that their projects trying to help with various mutual aid, with various anti-corruption measures, with various things like that, on the ground, in person, get out there. My voice has amplified the voice of many people just in Spokane alone, to the point where if you ask local Spokane activists, Trump and anti-Trump alike, they'll know my name. So to act, as though my nose is just consistently in a book, when I probably, almost certainly, spend more time physically outside than Jeremy Kauffman does, and to pretend that then, because of this false dichotomy that was invented whole cloth to strawman my position, that I am somehow entirely book-moded, and that Jeremy Kauffman somehow isn't, when in practical reality, he just got charged and detained because he hit somebody with his car, got out and started a bunch of fights and racial altercations at a grocery store, to the point where his kids had to physically pull him inside the store to get him to stop making an ass out of himself. To say that he, by some sort of weird metric, makes people's lives better on the street and makes people's lives concretely safer is absurd. He routinely starts altercations. So do people like him. The Chud the Builder model is being followed by people like Libertarian Party of New Hampshire, and that's the reason they were totally fine with being sponsored by somebody like Liberty Plus, a literal Nazi recruitment organization that terrorizes their neighborhoods, and is directly affiliated with, like NSW, like organizations in that regard. These people actively contribute to the suffering in their local communities. And, maybe to a certain extent I do. Maybe they would be more comfortable if I stayed indoors and wasn't an aggressive, mentally ill furry in public. But I would probably venture to guess that my community likes me better than his community likes him. I would probably venture to guess that my assistance with helping with local mutual aid, with food, with helping with the spreading of local organizations that can get people the help they need when they need it, that my assistance with documenting local civil rights cases, that my assistance with various other sorts of concrete methods has been dramatically helpful in very specific cases. I also helped these people when somebody tried to falsely claim that they stole his flag. There's a variety of people who know my name precisely because I'm not just stuck in a book. And I would venture to guess that you knew none of this until now, because you formed an opinion of me and what I do online, largely based on certain circles that you're in and what they also say about me. I think you basically knew nothing about me prior to this, with very few exceptions, and that this might maybe give you a slightly different impression. But what I can also tell you is this. The organizations that I'm working with, they help people on an active basis, on a routine basis. And I'll be working with these organizations and similar organizations to form solidarity and intersectionality with as many people as possible. This involves a philosophical root. It involves being able to tell when somebody is a malicious actor and who needs to be handled. It involves being able to tell when there's an Orthodox Christian across the street with a cross and an American flag with opinions that are guaranteeably wrong. And when I confronted that guy, he said he wanted all non-whites gone from this country. When I got that guy accountability, when I showed his face to the world, when I got him to say what his ideas were and hold him accountable for his bigotry, which only results in anti-libertarian ends, he hasn't shown his face anywhere since. Ultimately, when it comes down to it, the ostracism handles itself, to the point where that guy asked me to blur his face. I declined. When it comes down to it, these people make their own problems when they demonstrate how ugly their mentalities are. Everybody, with very few exceptions in New Hampshire, hates Jeremy Kauffman. There's very few people that you're going to find in the New Hampshire state who don't have a problem with him. In fact, his comments have cost candidates in the Libertarian Party tens of thousands of dollars when donors said, "Nah, we're good. We're not going to support people who claim to love veterans in one breath and then say all this stuff about them the next." When it comes down to it, these people are fundamentally detrimental to their own stated goals. And I am not perfect. I'm an asshole. I'm a very abrasive person, and I've spent a significant amount of my time alienating a whole lot of people, especially in libertarian circles. But I think for valuable reasons, because when it comes down to it, these people support Hitler, Pinochet, and a variety of other authoritarians when it comes down to it. And if we don't get rid of those people, we will have nothing but those people and the people that represent them in power.
Thank you so much for telling me that. I actually really appreciate it. And you're right. I did not know that information. And I'm sorry that it took an hour and 40 minutes for you to demonstrate that, yes, freedom of association helps people. Exactly what I said at the very beginning and what I've been arguing. One of my three concepts, when we put them into play, when we focus on them, that's when you have the stories. Nothing else before that did you provide a story for. That's when you provided a story. Thank you so much. And actually, great work for you.
And so we're going to get to closing statements here. We'll have Jeremiah go first, and then DL go last.
Sure.
So Jeremiah, closing statements.
Freedom of association is a philosophical platitude. In action, freedom of association looks like people being able to associate with whoever they so choose, even if that person is non-white, and even if that person is strictly white. What I'm trying to recommend is not that somebody in a freedom of association mentality cannot unite with their fellow authoritarians. What I am saying is that bigotry is that. Because these people that support these mentalities, they're never just saying, yeah, we just want our, weird libertarian collective and to be left alone. New Hampshire Libertarian Party, for instance, directly states on a routine basis, don't come to New Hampshire. You won't be safe in New Hampshire. We will remove you from New Hampshire. That sort of thing is directly anathema to freedom of association. And in practice, you get things like Carla. Carla is a 10-year-old girl and the daughter of a local roofer here in Spokane. And she was robbed from her community, ripped away from her life, traumatized, thrown in a Texas concentration camp by a fascist administration that was endorsed by the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire, that was endorsed by the previous bigoted Libertarian Party chair, that is continually endorsed by the Mises Caucus, who even now sends out emails about how they got so successful with the Trump administration, and whose executive director in the Mises Caucus is also the secretary for Trump's third-term project, Amber Harris. Mentality-wise and practicality-wise, I can find hundreds of examples of people in the Libertarian Party alone, much less the broader alleged libertarian movement, who are directly detrimental to freedom and who would have this traumatic experience happen to so many people like Carla if they got the chance. She's been returned to Spokane. That is an admission of guilt by this administration. That is an admission from this administration that they tortured a family for nothing. Normally, I would swear there. That they abused the human liberty, the free association of the communities in question to have these people as their members. Because they decided from a top-down level, from their bigoted lens, how these communities should be run. Evil. Not libertarian. Evil. This is not libertarianism if it does not allow for the freedom of association of people within the society in question. And the bigots, in order to start buying the bricks, needed to accept that maybe their previous barriers that you say were broken down were wrong, were at least challengeable, were irrational, were repugnant, were giving them inferior bricks at inferior prices for what? Must skin color? No thanks. I'll take the higher route. When it comes to it, libertarianism is that higher route, and it breaks down all these bigoted barriers to allow for the freedom of association and for the liberty, the self-ownership of the people of different skin color, gender, religion, creed, class, coming into this with the abandonment of previous notions that these things are inherent and default and inferior. That's the only way forward. That's the only way to liberty. The only way anywhere here is to come to the conclusion that these barriers need to be taken down. And those barriers are irrational and repugnant. And that is inherently what I was saying this whole time. I've got concrete examples. I could have just self-aggrandized this whole time, but that's not the point of this debate. I could have just come in this, been like, yo, I'm with a local mutual aid organization. I just helped fold a bunch of zines. We've got all this material. I've helped with the filming of local benefits concerts that help with the homeless. I'm on board. I'm plugged in, yo. I've got credentials. But that ultimately wouldn't help. And nobody who wasn't already on my side, or at least amenable to it, would care about that. Not to begin with. They would need to be convinced that these organizations were even a good thing to begin with. And those people are too bigoted most of the time to even do that. Because these organizations are leftist. And they say leftists need to be thrown out of helicopters. And they don't care when I mention that the same did that was raping their children. They don't care about the torture. They don't care about the inhumanity, the regime change, the poisonings, the murder, the cancer, the torture, the death. They don't care about that because they're bigots. And this is provable whenever you bring these things up. They're not willing to have a human discussion about the natural consequences of their beliefs. And the natural consequences of their beliefs in practicality, not just on paper, are an anti-libertarian world. And that's why these people are fundamentally anathema to libertarianism. I condemn bigotry as irrational, repugnant, and anti-libertarian.
The world is an evil place. It always has been throughout human history, in every culture, every civilization. And there is no reason to believe that at any point that will change. Years ago, when I was a young lad, I took Taekwondo. My instructor made a very good point that he said regularly. He said, you need to learn the basics, and you need to learn them well. He continued on and he said, the reason that you learn these basics is because you can defeat somebody who does all sorts of sophisticated moves. And so too with libertarianism. We must focus on the basics. Those basics serve us well, but more importantly, they serve others well. It's not about coming on a show and bragging about what you've done. It's not the point. The point is to illustrate that when we are in service to other people, there are certain concepts that are at play. And if we recognize that the world is a cruel place, always has been, and it looks like it'll always be for the foreseeable future, then rather than focus on, we got to tear this structure down. Why? At what point have we demonstrated that that effort is the best use of our time when we've demonstrated historically and in our own lives that focusing on the basics actually helps people? Would it be nicer if organizations and politicians and other sorts of people didn't exist, or perhaps existed in a framework that made the world a better place? Yes, it would. And then we'd be fighting some other fight with somebody else. The ideas of self-ownership, the non-aggression principle, and freedom of association, they're powerful. They're not only powerful, they're things that we can talk about on a regular basis. And when people ask us questions about how the world actually works, how the world becomes a better place, we can easily bring virtually any topic right back, just like I did. I said, hey, how did you benefit somebody? This wasn't a challenge to assume necessarily that you hadn't. I would hope that everybody helps the little old lady across the street at the very least, perhaps do much more than that. The point of questions like that is to say, we can do things, we can improve people's lives today, right now. And sure, maybe it's not this person or that person, it's somebody else. But again, it is a cruel, cruel world. And so when I say, I want to spend the short time that I have on this floating rock doing the maximum that I can do to benefit other people. What's the easiest way to accomplish that? Is it by reading books and arguing hypotheticals? No, because at the end of the day, when people talk about the books that they've read, the hypotheticals that they come up with, they don't bring them back and say, well, because of this hypothetical, here's how this person's life was better. What they say is, because I chose to engage in freedom of association, this person had a better life. Whether that was going over and just mowing their lawn or protecting them from a bigot. At the end of the day, we have some options. And I say that those options are best focused on the basics. And when the wider world continually hears a consistent, simple message that we can bring back to tangible outcomes, that is when I think we can start convincing them. We can say, hey, look, these ideas work. Self-ownership, that works. The non-aggression principle, that works. Freedom of association, that works. It delivers results. Because when I go and talk to my neighbors, when I go and maybe help out at, a local, a local business that's, working with maybe indigenous people, or helping out. I used to help out with Daniel Kids, a local organization for at-risk youth. When I go down there, they don't care what books that I've read. They don't care what hypotheticals I can concoct. What they care is, how can you help me today? That's what I'm interested in. That's what I think the Libertarian Party, the Libertarian movement needs to focus on. And when we do that, we can start tearing down, or making a dent, at least, in bigotry around the world. That's what I got.
Thanks to both of you for this wonderful debate. I like both of you. So it's a rare thing, and you both are great spokesmen for the cause.
Oh, you're being nice because you're on my show. No, I was kidding.
Well, I've want to take you right out of your own show, just that way I can take full advantage. That's what I've been waiting for the longest time.
Hilarious.
Yeah, if you say you like me, there are plenty of people who say that you're now a cult member. So, because the only people
cool.
who
I've
would
always
like
wanted
me
to be
are
in
in
a cult.
Yeah, and I got the hair, I got the beard. Here, I'll do this too. But we gotta get the full Kool-Aid there.
But I've really appreciated you doing this, and I've got a deeper understanding of where both of you come from.
All right. So are we at a close then, or what are we up to here?
We are at a close.
All right then.
If you want to throw some of these comments up there, you can. But
I wasn't really paying attention. Like, the screen's way away, and so I can't really read the comments. So if you saw some that you like there, Jake, go ahead and throw them up there.
There's quite a few comments here. Many of them were good.
Because I think the audience is pretty huge on whether or not the debate was a success in one way or another. So, like, that's how Soho Forum does it, but they have a much more numerical system. It would have been cool to implement that, but I don't realistically think we had the time to structure the whole poll mentality.
I'm not even sure how we would technologically do it. I know it's my show, but I don't do polls, so I don't know how that would accomplish. I don't know how we'd accomplish it.
It looks like it's DFN Liberty as one of your mods.
Yeah.
So I think maybe whoever that is could have just thrown a link to a poll up, but it would have been needlessly complicated. I think we got the points out that we would have.
So. All right.
So I guess we got the Hodeman saying, thanks for the debate. Y'all definitely have a side on this one, but I appreciate the perspectives and experiences and ideas being shared. I'm better for it. Got another one?
Oh, I'm looking over here.
Shout out to Hody at Love First Christians. Go join that if you can.
Oh yeah, Jeremiah, make sure you send me a link tree or something, and I'll throw it in the show notes.
Yeah, I will at some point soon. I meant to do that, but then a bunch of other stuff came up, and I've basically been just editing content. So, freedom of association does not allow equal allowing people to break the law because you want your way. I don't know. I think that asking the government effectively what you can do to resist the government is a mistake. I think that what is legal is not always ethical, and that lawbreakers are the foundation of liberty. I'm not going to say what to do with that information because I don't want to get this channel or me banned from places, but I will just say that Jesus went in with a whip and overturned tables. Do with that what you will. Costco Law School. I thought you were like Costco Laws. So Costco Law School says bigotry is not from statism. It is a product of the tribalism inherent in all human beings through time. It's in our nature.
I would agree.
Cool, man. So I would disagree because there are plenty of people who form non-bigoted groups. And if that's not possible, then there is no breaking down these barriers and you undermine your own position. But go for it. If you want to defend that. James Daniels. You've got like the Facebook dad profile picture there. you're in your car with your shades. I think you're about to podcast at me. Is defined by the belief libertarianism is defined by the belief that the NAP and property rights, or in the NAP and property rights, everything after that is a preference. Unless these bigots are violating property rights or the NAP, then the assertion is false. No, for the reasons I just said. If they don't believe in other people's free will, then they don't fundamentally believe in liberty to begin with. You can say the opposite if you want. I mean, this is your show. That's my take.
No, I agree. I would agree with that. Absolutely.
Well, DL, it is your show. Is there anything special you want to do to close us out?
No, I think we'll just, see. It's what time is it now? It's 10 p.m. folks here. You said you're in what? Spokane?
Yeah, I'm in Spokane, where it's only 7. So it's but it's always Manton o'clock over here.
So yeah, it's 10 p.m. here. I better skedaddle out of here just because I still have to get up at like 5 a.m. and do my thing. So and I still got to walk the dog.
Jammy treat, that is not how you spell your.
So
you all have a good one.